So this is lesson 43's grammar about participles, and I'm going to try to go a little bit above and beyond what the textbook has to offer. I'm going to try to give you a good foundation for lesson 43 and lesson 44 and next year's work with participles as well. All right. Eventually this little click is going to register, and here are the basics. Right now in Latin, you only know the perfect passive participle, and sometimes you only know it by the acronym, whatever, nickname, P cubed. If you want P times 3, go ahead, or 3P. It is worth noting that a perfect passive participle is that verb's, if it is a transitive verb, it is that verb's fourth principal part. If it's an intransitive verb, it doesn't have a P cubed, it has a FAP, something else altogether. A reminder, something we have talked about before, and we'll revisit again in more detail. Participles blend the line between verbs and adjectives. They, in fact, fulfill the functions of both. As verbs, they suggest a verb's action. Actually, they don't suggest it, they indicate a verb's action. And as adjectives, they describe nouns commonly, or pronouns. Now, this is where things start getting new and fresh and worthy of extra emphasis, right, with this bullet point. Are you guys behind, or are you caught up to the specified bullet point? Okay. Remember, you can always use condensed versions of what I write, but I'm going to wait a little longer so that everyone can get to this bullet point because it is important. The P cubed, now I'm going to start rolling towards that highlighted bullet point, is a verb form. It suggests a verb's action, actually expresses a verb's action. Mara? Okay. All right. According to the label P cubed, perfect passive participle, participle means taking part in both verb and adjective worlds. Passive means passive, and perfect means finished before the main verb. Okay. So when you guys translate a P cubed, and this sort of starts to hint at your question, Cole, back there, the action of a P cubed, must always be translated as passive and as occurring before the action of the main verb. So, in that sentence, in the textbook, convocati is a P cubed. It refers to boys having been called together before the action of the main verb can happen. And if you use a temporal clause, a temporal conjunction, after works really nicely to say after the boys have been called together, they will hear the words of the teacher. Yes? In Latin, there is the present active participle and the future active participle, the PAP and the FAP. And you will learn those next year, okay? You're going to work towards mastery of translating participles with subordinate clauses, just using the perfect passive participle. Okay. All right. So, if it's passive, keep it passive. So, second point worth emphasizing, although this is not really as new as it might seem. When a P cubed is used as an adjective, it must agree in gender, case, and number with the word that it is describing. That word will usually be a noun. Sometimes it will be a pronoun. When it comes to adjective endings, the P cubed uses the full set of adjective endings that you'd find on a normal first or second declension adjective, like magnus, magna, magnum, or something similar. Questions? As we saw in the last lesson, which in my view is kind of putting the horse behind the cart, or the cart in front of the horse, any adjective, including a P cubed, may be used as a substantive. It may be used as a noun. In which case, well, we'll deal with that when we come to it. Questions so far? Basic translation options. Now this is all old news, but I'm going to linger over this old news just to make sure that you guys have that baseline comfort level with past participles in English. Okay. Up till now, with the exception of a little pushing from me when we were doing some in-class translation, when you guys have seen a P cubed used as an adjective in a sentence, your two options have been the cookie cutter translation having been blanked, okay, or just plain old blanked. And what's in parentheses, that blank, is filled by the English verb's past participle. So this is relying on your knowledge of English, which even though we have an excellent English program here, even for the best of us, okay, it's a challenging thing. Past participles often, though not always, end in ed, d, en, n, or t. And if you guys want to, you can tell me what the past participle of love is. Loved. What about tell? Told. What about take? Taken. What about see? Seen. What about keep? Okay. What about drink? Drunk. Okay. 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 All right. So, would you like me to write those past participles up here? Come on. Loved, told, taken, seen, and kept. What about lose? Lost. What about think? Thought. Not thunk or thank. Okay? All right. All right, in lesson 42, kind of moving into the next bullet point, we also talked about nouns used as, participles used as nouns, as substantives. And that really is just kind of a cart before the horse kind of thing, but since they did put the cart in front of the horse, remember that when there's a substantive, you must kind of draw in information from the participle's ending, whether it's neuter or masculine, plural or singular, feminine, an appropriate translation. So if we take factum as neuter, we have a one-word translation that we can use thanks to the lesson 42 vocab list. It was deed, but you could also translate it as a thing done. Datum, you could translate it as a thing that has been given, or a thing having been given, or as we came up with yesterday in class, a gift. Now what happens When amata mea shows up, and I use amata as a substantive, yes. It can be my love, or what if we stretched for a bit more of a participial form in English? Uh, that's good. My love is not wrong. It's just, Augusta? I, no, I'm looking for something a little more participial than dear. Maxime? No, not quite. Yeah, my beloved. We could translate this using the word beloved, I know, which is kind of old-fashioned with that be on the front of it, as a substantive. Okay? Why are you guys looking at each other when I say my beloved? I don't understand. Okay. All right. So, questions. Notice in this instance, my beloved has a feminine ending, as I would use for my feminine wife. Can we move on? Complex translation options. I know, Jake likes to keep it simple. Yes, both of them probably. Okay? But we are going to need to, because of the frequency with which Latin uses participles, and the way in which English word order can be tricky, befuddling, and confusing. We're going to need to eventually learn how to use more complex translations with subordinate clauses for these participles. Okay. And I try to explain the reasons why before I start telling you the translation strategies that we'll use. Okay. If the participle is in a Latin sentence used in a case other than the nominative or the accusative, by the time we get it into English with all kinds of translation strategies that involve, in English, when you're translating the genitive case, you often use an apostrophe s or an of. When you're using the ablative case, you often have a preposition in there. It gets all muddled. And the flow of your clauses will get the flow of your sentence will get very, very muddled by the fact that we require all of those prepositions and alternative strategies in English. If English had a true, honest-to-goodness case system like it used to, we'd be good. We'd be golden. It did. What? Yes. We still have it, you know, residually in I love you and you love me. I and me are two different cases. You know, in English, you talk about the objective case of pronouns. Okay. So, Charles hugged us on the last day of the semester. Okay. We hugged Charles. Us and we, same people, but different cases. All right. Yes. I'm sorry again. That's a verb ending. It's a verb ending, yes. Okay. Shutteth uppeth. Okay. Okay. All right. A participle in Latin can be part of a very, very long phrase that is stuffed full of adverbs, prepositional phrases, and potentially even other modifiers. Now, I'm showing you a particularly gruesome example of such a really long phrase where there is a noun and it is described by a participle. But if we translated it with a cooking cutter translation, my goodness, we would get lost. Okay. By the way, I should try to draw this linkage to something you probably have talked about in English classes. Have you guys in English classes ever talked about misplaced modifiers? Okay. What about dangling participles? That phrase has mostly gone out of use and been replaced by the phrase misplaced modifiers, although I think dangling participles are slightly more, picturesque. I don't know, but when you have misplaced modifiers, it's because you're not grouping words together appropriately. And that, again, is something that using a subordinate clause can help you to avoid. I'm going to ask you guys, where is the participle? Yes, vulnerato. I'm going to ask you guys now to tell me what vulnerato describes, and I'm assuming that it is not vos. It isn't graikis, and I'll tell you why. Graikis is plural, vulnerato is singular. Okay. Gai? Is it the spelunka? No, and I'll tell you why. Because vulnerato is masculine and spelunka is feminine. So instead, you have to do what Charles did. Sorry, Charlie. Charles. Okay. Okay. And take it all the way back to kuklopa. Notice this is third declension and ablative and singular. Vulnerato is second declension, but it's also ablative and singular and masculine in the way that the Cyclops is. Okay. Now, some of you guys are going to start translating this, and that'll be fine and good and wonderful, and I'm sure you'll do a splendid job. However, I want you guys to notice how packed is the space, and this is really common Latin word order. We'll have noun here, separated way far away from the participle, and all kinds of modifiers stuffed in between, an adverb, an ablative of agent, a prepositional phrase that tells place where. Okay. No, it's very sensible. They're giving you, it's like giving you an envelope. The noun is one side of the envelope, the participle is the other side of the envelope, and everything else is nicely contained inside you. Do me a favor, translate vos docui. I have taught you, okay? Or simply I taught you, which is fine. Now I want to ask you guys a question. Did I teach you in a cave? No, okay? Did I teach you harshly? No, you haven't seen harsh yet, okay? All right? You're still able to sit, aren't you? Did I teach you away from the Greeks? By the Greeks? I don't know. No. Listen, these prepositional phrases and adverbs, they're put between the noun and the participle so that you translate them with the participle. This is going to be so awesome. You guys are going to come up with a translation. Okay. That is splendid and spiffy. And oops, I went past the opportunity for you guys to translate it. Yes. Sure. Now, is that a good translation? Yes. Okay. Pause for just a second. Anyone need any changes to this besides Owen? Owen? That's right. Okay. So if we were to somehow drop out of the sentence the words which and had been, okay, it's going to make a long string of modifiers which could potentially be misunderstood. I taught you about the Cyclops wounded harshly by the Greeks in the cave. It could create the impression that I taught you in the cave or that I taught you harshly. But the use of a subordinate clause introduced by which, and then I want you guys to notice what has started to happen. Instead of translating with a cookie cutter translation, having been wounded or just plain old wounded, I've started to convert the participle into a fully conjugated verb. Now let me ask you guys this question, is which had been wounded, is that passive? Yes. Does it clearly communicate the wounding happened before I taught you about it? Yes. Okay. And that tense structure of the actions is essential when you're working with perfect passive participles. Yes. Charles. You could. I mean, what I'd prefer is that you use a relative clause and then it's all good. In other words, if which had been wounded harshly by the Greeks in a cave is there, to me there's no confusion about what happened in the cave. All right, questions? So there will be times, including when we do translations in lessons 43 and 44, when cookie cutter translation options fail. They go like Mario driving his cart off a cliff, except there are no new lives. Second declension. Second declension neuter endings on the participle. Yeah. All right, so when you're starting to work with complex participial phrases in Latin sentences and getting them into English, you're going to want to use an English subordinate clause. Please don't write down these first two bullet points. They don't have any valuable information in them, okay? But do remember, if you don't already, that subordinate clauses always begin with a special pronoun, either a relative pronoun or with a special conjunction. In English, when you use a subordinate clause to translate a participle, you will choose from 5 options. And I know, for some of you, 5 is too many. So come back tomorrow with a fewer fingers on each hand. Okay. Sorry. There's the good old relative clause. Not to say that all of my relatives are old or good, but a good old relative clause. A temporal clause. A causal clause. Causal, don't confuse it with casual. Okay. The casual clause is, hey dude, what's up? That's not a causal clause. Okay. The fourth type is, I call it a concessive clause. Our textbook calls it an adversative clause. I will teach you both terms because you'll encounter both terms later on in your Latin grammatical life. So the fourth type is a concessive/adversative clause. And the fifth type that the textbook chooses not to teach you about is a conditional clause. Excuse me. Anyone need more time with those? Okay. We don't have time to begin the next slide anyway, so there's no Huge rush. Gotta tell you, it's really important for your future in Latin. And this is one of those, gotta get it now as easily as possible concepts, or oh, I can't get it now. I'm gonna pretend I get it, and then I'm not gonna get it later either. Oh, I better try. Anyway, get it now. We will have much supporting detail in slides tomorrow. You will have examples of each type of subordinate clause, represented by a participial phrase in Latin and an English subordinate clause. So we'll be able to